The wind knifed through the ridgeline as the moon broke free from a bank of clouds, throwing silver light across jagged rock and dust. The team had moved under cover of darkness, boots muffled against the shale, comms clipped and efficient. What was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance sweep, a half-dozen men armed with rifles and old radios, had turned into something else entirely. The first burst of gunfire had shredded the silence like tearing canvas. Muzzle flashes lit the cliffside, and voices in Pashto and Dari echoed far too many for the intel reports. At least 30, maybe more. The trap was sprung before they had even realized how badly the numbers had been wrong. Maya Chen dropped low, her rifle bucking as she fired 3 controlled bursts into the shadows, watching 2 shapes crumple against the rocks. Her team leader barked into comms, ordering fallback, but the canyon twisted and split, scattering them in the chaos of grenades and collapsing rock. Smoke and dust filled the air. The mountain itself seemed to turn against them. Maya pivoted left, covering the retreat. But in the confusion, the channel went dead. The last thing she heard was static, followed by silence. Then the night closed in around her. She ran, low and fast, weaving between stone outcrops, every sense sharpened. But they were waiting. A rope snare whipped her legs out from under her, slamming her into the ground. Before she could roll, 3 men were on her, rifles pressing into her spine, voices barking in clipped commands. She tried to twist free, but the butt of an AK caught her across the temple, flooding her vision with white sparks. Her hands were yanked behind her back, wrists bound tight with rough cord that bit into her skin. The hood went over her head in a rush of coarse fabric and dust. Darkness became absolute, sound amplifying in the void. Boots scraped rock around her, men shouting, a truck engine rumbling nearby. She stumbled as they dragged her forward, the ground uneven, her knees striking stone again and again. Pain radiated from her skull, but she forced her breathing to steady. Not ragged, not panicked, controlled. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. A metronome in the chaos. The vehicle smelled of diesel and sweat. Men laughed, arguing in a language she only half understood. The hood muffled the words, but the cadence told her everything. They thought they had won something great. A woman, an American, a soldier. They believed they were in control. She let her body slump against the metal bed of the truck, as though broken, listening, cataloging. The rattle of rifles against the side rails, the metallic click of a lighter, the rhythm of a man's boots shifting with impatience. She mapped them all in her head. The journey was long, rough terrain jolting her body, but she never lost count of the turns, the time between gear shifts, the incline of the road. When the truck finally ground to a halt, her ears picked up dripping water, the hiss of a generator, the echo of voices bouncing from stone. A cave. A compound hidden deep in the mountains, shielded by rock and secrecy. She was hauled out, feet dragging, air damp and cold. The hood lifted for just a second as they forced her inside, long enough for her to catch a glimpse of flickering light bulbs strung along a tunnel and crude steel bars cut into natural walls. Then the fabric came down again. They stripped her of weapons, body armor, boots, even her dog tags. All that remained was the thin layer of sweat-soaked clothing clinging to her skin and the cords biting deeper into her wrists. They shoved her into a cell, the clang of iron sealing her fate. The hood stayed on. She was alone in the dark. Every sound amplified the drip of water, the shuffle of guards outside, the faint hum of the generator faltering with uneven power. Her breathing stayed calm. Her muscles remained loose, conserving strength. Her mind did not wander to fear or to failure. Instead, it began its work, counting the guards by their steps, measuring distance by the echo of their voices, listening for habits who smoked, who scratched at his beard, who leaned his rifle against the bars with careless routine. Each detail logged, each weakness marked. They thought they had captured her. They thought the cords and the hood made her powerless. But behind the fabric, in the silence of her own mind, Maya Chen was already building the map of her escape. Already calculating how, one by one, she would turn their arrogance into their graves. The cell stank of rust, smoke, and damp earth. A single bulb dangled from a cord above her head, its light fluttering in uneven pulses that painted the cave walls in shifting shadows. The bars weren't steel, not really salvaged scaffolding hammered into place, their welds sloppy, their foundation uneven. Still, to the untrained eye it looked secure. To Maya Chen, it looked temporary. Everything could be broken if you knew where to lean, where to twist, where to wait. The commander visited her the first night. He entered with a dozen men flanking him, rifles slung casually, their confidence reeking of arrogance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard braided with beads that clinked when he moved. His eyes lingered on her like she was already dead, yet his smile told her he had other plans. A woman soldier, he sneered in English thickened by accent. Special forces. America will pay much to see you beg. His men laughed, some jeering in their own tongue, their words unnecessary. She understood enough to know they saw her as a prize, a trophy, a message to be broadcast on shaky cameras, paraded across the networks as proof of their power. Maya said nothing. Silence was its own kind of weapon, and she wielded it well. Her gaze stayed fixed on the commander, unblinking, her face a mask carved from stone. Eventually, his smile faltered. Men like him fed on fear, on cries, on defiance that they could punish. What unnerved them was calm, the kind of quiet that suggested she was seeing past them, through them, to their weaknesses. He spat at the bars before leaving, muttering to his men, "She will break." They underestimated her from the start. Guards tossed food through the bars, half-rotten bread, a dented tin cup of water. They taunted her, calling her ghost, witch, phantom. They struck the bars with their rifle butts, hoping to startle her. She never flinched. What they didn't realize was that every insult, every routine, every careless gesture was information. She noticed the youngest guard never tied knots tightly, preferring quick loops. Another smoked constantly, setting his rifle down within arm's reach of the bars. At night, she counted their steps, marking the rhythm of their rotations. When the generator sputtered, she timed how long the lights went out: 3 seconds, sometimes 4. Enough to vanish if she needed to. One evening, while pretending to slump in exhaustion, her eyes caught on a detail. A bolt at the base of one bar, flecked with rust, loose enough that each time the guard slammed his rifle against it, it shifted. She tested it with her fingers when the cell was dark, careful, patient. It wiggled. Not much, but enough. Behind her, a water pipe rattled along the rock wall, condensation dripping in steady beats. She tested the metal with her knuckles. Hollow, weak at the joint. With leverage, it could be broken. And broken, it could be sharpened. In the stillness of the cave, her mind drifted to the training that had forged her. Days locked in simulated cells with blaring noise and blinding lights. Weeks without sleep, interrogators circling like vultures. Every moment designed to break her, to teach her that the body could be caged but the mind must stay free. She remembered her instructor's words whispered in the cold hours of dawn. Your heartbeat is your compass. As long as it beats steady, you are never lost. That was why she had been chosen for missions like this. Not her marksmanship, not her endurance, though both were exceptional. It was her uncanny ability to remain composed in captivity, to turn patience into a blade. Where others panicked, she calculated. Where others saw prison, she saw puzzle. The guards thought the silence meant defeat. They mistook stillness for weakness. But Maya was already dismantling the cage around her piece by piece, bolt by bolt, habit by habit. She wasn't waiting for rescue. Rescue was a gamble. Escape was inevitable. All she needed was time, and time was something her captors had just given her. The generator's sputter was her signal. It had been failing for days, coughing and wheezing before clawing back to life. Tonight it faltered longer than usual, plunging the compound into a darkness thick as oil. The voices of guards rose in irritation, their laughter cut short as the single bulb in her cell blinked out. For most, darkness was fear. For Maya Chen, it was freedom. She had been working the shackle pin for hours, maybe days. It was hard to measure time underground. Each twist, each angle of pressure had worn it down until finally it snapped. The tiny shard of metal dug into her palm as she worked it against the cords binding her wrists. The fibers scraped, tore, and then gave way. Her hands came free just as the light above her guttered out completely. She didn't move at once. Stillness was survival. She listened first, the shuffle of boots outside the bars, the murmur of men distracted by the blackout, the clatter of a rifle butt against rock as one cursed the generator. When she finally moved, it was liquid and silent, her body low, her breath controlled. She slid to the bars, found the loose bolt, and pushed. Metal groaned faintly, but the blackout swallowed the sound. The bar shifted just enough for her body to slip through. The first guard never saw her. One moment he was swearing at the darkness, the next her hand was on his mouth, the other driving the shard of metal deep into his throat. He spasmed once, his knife clattering against the ground, and she caught it before it made noise. She lowered him carefully, easing his body into the shadows beside the wall. Blood seeped warm across her knuckles, but her heartbeat stayed steady, as calm as the training demanded. With a real blade in her hand, the cave changed. It was no longer their stronghold, it was hers. She moved through the corridors as though she had built them herself, slipping behind crates, using the rhythm of dripping water to mask her footsteps. Two guards stood near the generator room, their rifles slung carelessly as they argued. She was on them before the taller one finished his sentence. A swift slice across the throat, a knife plunged under the ribs. They crumpled like puppets with strings cut, their blood pooling black in the low light. Each kill was precise, economical. No wasted motion, no flourish. Her unit's doctrine whispered in her mind. No noise, no mercy. She dragged bodies into alcoves, broke lamps to create deeper shadows, scattered loose shell casings down side passages to misdirect. Fear was a weapon, and she sharpened it with every step. By the time the generator roared back to life, 6 men were already dead. The others felt it before they understood it, something unseen stalking them, something that turned their laughter into silence. They shouted to one another, voices cracking, the bravado of numbers stripped away. Rifles clicked nervously in the darkened halls, but each sound gave away a position. Maya circled them like a predator, cutting them off from one another, drawing them deeper into the cave's twisting arteries. A tripwire of cord here, a knife hurled with surgical accuracy there. Panic set in. The men fired wildly at shadows, bullets sparking against stone, echoing back on themselves. She waited for the silence that followed wasted ammunition, then struck again. By dawn, the cave stank of blood and cordite. The survivors huddled together, eyes wide, whispering of jinns, of curses, of the ghost they had caged that now hunted them. Maya crouched in the rafters above the central chamber, blade wet in her hand, her breathing steady as the earth itself. She watched them tremble in their own fortress, fear unraveling them from the inside. They didn't know her name. They didn't know what unit had trained her, what scars she carried, what memories she had learned to weaponize. All they knew was that something was out there in the dark, killing with silence and precision. And as the first sliver of light crept into the cave mouth, every man left alive understood the truth too late. This was no prisoner. This was their executioner. The cave smelled of blood and smoke. Shadows jittered along the walls from lamps that swung loose on their cords, their glass cracked from stray bullets. The once boisterous compound had become a tomb of silence broken only by whispers and the occasional distant scream when Maya struck again. The commander paced the central chamber, fury tightening every muscle. He had started the night with over 30 men. Now he had fewer than half, and they were jumpy, twitching at every drip of water, every echo of footsteps that weren't there. It wasn't just the kills, it was the way she had orchestrated them. Knives in the dark, throats cut before men could cry out, rocks dislodged to make them think she was above them, moving through the rafters. A flare left hissing in the dirt to blind them, gunfire echoing down passages she had already abandoned. She had turned their home ground into a labyrinth of fear. He tried to rally them, barking orders, demanding patrols, forcing groups to move together. But she adapted, slipping into their blind spots, baiting them with dropped cartridges or a scrap of torn cloth that led them deeper into darkness. One man vanished at the latrine. Another was found dangling from a broken pipe, his body used to block a passageway. The survivors grew restless, arguing among themselves, suspicion tearing at the fragile discipline that remained. Maya knew the mind unraveled faster than the body. A taunt whispered from the shadows here, a thrown pebble there. Men fired at ghosts until the barrels of their rifles steamed. She separated them, nudged them into blind corners, let their panic do half the work. By the time dawn threatened the horizon outside, the commander found himself standing with only 5 men he could still trust, if trust even meant anything anymore. He retreated to his war room, a crude table pressed against the far wall of the cavern, maps spread with pins and grease pencil marks. Radios crackled with static, useless now that his network was broken. He planted his fists on the table, sweat running down his temples despite the chill air. For the first time, doubt carved into his arrogance. His men whispered of Jinn, of a phantom conjured by American sorcery. He spat at them, but deep inside, he felt the same unease. The lamps flickered again, and that was when she came. Maya stepped from the shadows at the edge of the chamber, her clothes torn, blood hers and others streaking her arms. The knife glistened black in her hand, her posture low and precise. She said nothing. Words were unnecessary. The commander's eyes widened, and in that flicker of fear, he knew. The prisoner had become the predator, and he the prey. He drew his pistol and fired, the crack deafening in the chamber. She was already moving, sliding low, the bullet sparking against the stone wall behind her. She closed the distance in a heartbeat, the knife plunging once into his side, again under his chin. His eyes froze in shock as he collapsed onto the map-strewn table, blood soaking through the terrain lines he had drawn with such certainty hours before. His radio hissed uselessly, a ghostly voice calling for men who were already dead. Maya straightened, chest heaving, blood dripping from her blade. Around her, the war room was silent, except for the faint buzz of static. She searched quickly, stripping intel from the table, handwritten notes, frequency lists, codes scrawled on scraps of paper. She rolled them tight, tucking them into a pouch. The cave mouth opened to the mountains beyond. The first pale light of dawn painted the rocks in silver as she stepped out, her silhouette, a dark cut against the horizon. Behind her lay bodies scattered through the compound, their fear etched into every final posture. She paused at the wall near the exit, chalk in her hand from a fallen supply crate. Her letters were quick, deliberate, a message carved into memory as much as stone. Never underestimate the ghost you cage. Hours later, the extraction team swept the compound. Their boots echoed against the stone floors, their rifles sweeping corners that held only corpses. They expected signs of a battle, spent shell casings, walls torn by grenades. But the halls were quiet, each death precise, almost surgical. The war room reeked of iron and fear, the commander's body still slumped over his maps, his eyes open in disbelief. The chalk message was the only trace of her, the words standing stark in the gray light filtering through the entrance. Of Maya Chen, there was no sign, no body, no blood trail. Only the certainty that she had walked into the mountains carrying intelligence that would turn the tide of wars others would never even know existed. The commander's men had thought her a trophy, something to display. What they had unleashed instead was judgment, and she had delivered it with silence and efficiency. By the time the sun cleared the ridgeline, the cave compound was nothing more than a graveyard, and the legend of the ghost had grown.